On March 18th, 1990, the most audacious art heist of all time took place at the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum in Boston. Two men dressed as police officers were admitted into the building by security, claiming to be responding to a disturbance call.
In 81 minutes, 13 pieces of art were stolen. Among the portraits, stripped from their frames, were works by Vermeer, Degas, and Rembrandt. Estimated at $500 million, the heist has been categorized as the largest and most frustrating of all time. Theories of their whereabouts and those who perpetrated the crime are abundant.
In this podcast series, we will dig as deep as possible into the case, the theories, and the social and economic impact the greatest unsolved art heist of all time had on the community. This is Empty Frames. Welcome back to Empty Frames. I am Tim here today with Lance. How's it going, Lance?
Oh, it's going fantastic. I'm just checking my headphones here to make sure you just said welcome back to Empty Frames again.
I know.
I mean, what are we, in 2018 here? What are we? This is great. We're producing a lot more of these Empty Frames episodes because we have these individuals who we've spoken to before. They want to come back on the show. They have new updates on their theories about who stole the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum heist. And we also have really interesting developments with new people, like the filmmaker Eric Aronson, who made a great fictional story about the Gardner heist called Any Day Now. But even in his fictional telling of the story of the heist, you get some insights as to what he thinks might have happened, or just certain theories that all kind of come together that he put into his narrative. So it's all very educational, I guess, if we're talking about the Isabella Stewart Gardner heist. And this guest that we have on today, just like our old friend Turbo Paul Hendry, once you hop on this train, it's really tough to get control of it, and it's a fun ride. But Tim, I have no proper segue to you right now for how you're doing, so I'm just going to ask, how are you today?
Doing good over here. Thanks a lot. Yes, so this conversation today is with the Muddy River fact checker, otherwise known as Kerry Joyce, and he has joined the show, I want to say 2 or 3 times in the past. Maybe season 2, maybe earlier in season 3. Yeah, earlier in season 3 as well. And at the end of season 2. So you can scroll back and find him in previous appearances. Lance, this time he gives us his theory that he really hasn't given us before. And his theory is about a spy. And it's an interesting one, I gotta say. It has not been presented to us in any other way, shape, or form on these airwaves or privately. So it's exciting to share a new theory.
It is exciting to share a new theory, and it's exciting to share a new theory with somebody like Kerry, who now does not want to be exclusively called the Muddy River fact checker, which I'm in support of because, in retrospect, probably not the best nickname because that ends up getting shortened to Muddy, which is just not really what I want associated with somebody who's trying to provide facts. I want the facts to be clear, not muddy. So it's kind of this like ironic nickname that we all came up with. He's going by his real name now because he feels confident. He's dedicated a lot of time lately to this theory. But I just want to preface it by saying, you can take anybody and say anything about them in that time period and then put the details in place to say, well, why wouldn't it have been this person? And that's kind of what Kerry does in this conversation. I'm not saying it's not true. I'm just saying he's really locked in on this individual when, for example, I could be locked in on you, Tim. Like, what did you do that night? And then I could try to put all the pieces together on my own, or any one of our listeners.
Right, but I was 9 years old, though, so, I mean...
But have you ever, if you take a picture of you when you were 9 and you put it up against one of those police sketches...
I tried. It doesn't wash.
You kind of look like the guy with a mustache.
Maybe my dad does. Oops.
Oh, well, no, see? Well, get him on.
Yeah, it's a really interesting conversation. We do cover a lot. We get into Jeff Kelly's retirement from the FBI and sort of approach the FBI's investigation from a different angle. And that seems to be how Kerry got to his theory. is by sort of looking at the FBI's investigation and thinking it doesn't pass the sniff test.
But Tim, what does pass the sniff test for me is that we're going to CrimeCon.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, this is happening in September 5th, 6th, and 7th of 2025. We're going to be in Denver, Colorado. If you're in the area or if you want to travel to CrimeCon, you can get 10% off your ticket by using code Crawlspace at crimecon.com. And we are going to be doing a session at CrimeCon. It's not going to be about empty frames or about stolen art, but it is going to be very interesting.
And that session is with the renowned Joseph Scott Morgan. He's a big name in the true crime community. He is a scholar of applied forensics at Jacksonville State University, and dare I say, Tim, a distinguished one at that. So finally, we'll have some distinguished individual sitting up on a stage with us for a session to make us look a little bit better.
Okay, so we hope you like this episode with Kerry Joyce. Let us know what you think on Spotify or YouTube, and you can watch us on Spotify as well as listen on Apple. So let us know what you think there. You can comment right there on Spotify as well. And hey, if you've got any theories about the Gardner art, let us know. Send us an email. Please email us at dig@crawlspacepodcast.com. All right, everyone. Thanks a lot for listening, and you'll be hearing from us soon.
All right, we're going to break real quick for a commercial. We'll be right back with the Muddy River, Kerry Joyce.
Welcome back to the podcast. It's the Muddy River fact checker, Kerry Joyce. Kerry, how are you today?
I'm doing great today, Tim. How are you?
We're doing great over here as well, and it's good to see you finally. It's been a little while since you've been on the show.
Yeah, it's been a while, but we've sort of exchanged emails and stayed in touch, and I've been, I keep checking those facts all these years, so I'm still on the case. There's always, new wrinkles in the case. Abath passing away, and Jeff Kelly retired and saying, kind of changing the messaging that he's brought into it for the last over 20 years.
Right.
So a lot of developments, and some of it gives me hope that we might get some kind of resolution on this.
Fantastic. But we got to tell the listeners what we're talking about here. You have done a ton of work on the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum heist. I think a lot of people are familiar with you, but for anyone who isn't, can you just give a little background on yourself?
Well, I started, I was just like everybody else back in, I remember in 2012 reading the Robert Gentile story, which came out in the Globe about 3 weeks after the actual search of his home. That is in the olden days when the messaging about the Gardner heist in the media was a lot different. And I was kind of a little bit fascinated with that. Then I read the 2013 article that came out before the big announcement. And I remember seeing Abath and kind of being uncomfortable about the way he was smiling in the picture. And kind of reminded me of the Charles Stewart case, which had only been early, 6 months earlier. And I really was looking hard when they did the big announcement in 2013 that they knew who the thieves were, that they traced it to Philadelphia. So I studied that one hard. And then there was the Whitey Bulger trial, which I decided to sit out because because there's a lot of information in those kind of things that changes quickly. You hear the same thing over again. So I figure, well, I'll check it out when it's all done. But there was something about it, and there was someone that, who might be tangentially connected to it. So I did a little Google search, and there was this lady, Jan, who I think has been in touch with you. I had some information without knowing it that was not part of the 150 factoids that are out there about the Gardner heist. And I started looking at it and applying it. And, I had kind of an interesting adventure as I tried to find out what really happened in the context of some information that I had that was not in the mix at the time. And really to this day is not really discussed. But, and then I started looking what other people would say. And I found there was a lot of I feel provably false things going on in what was doing that. And I kind of satisfied myself with that, where I said, well, okay. I mean, I was interviewed by Steve Kirchen, And I did have an ongoing email exchange with Anthony Amore for about 10 weeks when I first contacted him. I've talked to these guys over the years. I've had my ups and downs with them, mostly downs in the last 8 years or so. But so I've had this interesting adventure, and I've been doing Google search type stuff since last century, before there was Google, from when they put their moms on Google for Mother's Day. So I'm really good at like doing the Google searches and going to the web archive, and so I think I have something to contribute in like helping keep it real. And you guys have been indispensable in providing some really important, hard information. You haven't really got the credit. The Marge Galis interview, the Rockwell, I don't remember his first name right now. Rockwell interview was really interesting. Yeah, Jeff. Of course, the Stephanie Rabinowitz things and Eric Ullis stuff was great. Recently, the Charles Pinning stuff was all over those pictures that he had in the front about of the annex and that whole deal, which is sort of like confusing my brain all these years. Like, how did this all trying to fit these puzzle pieces together? And I don't agree with Charles, but it's a good, solid case that he makes, and he's a very good presenter. And I don't question his sincerity. You have people like him and Casey Sherman. These are professional communicators. They go out and they can talk to you. You could have a show with Charles Pinning talking about women okra next week. I'll tune in because I just have confidence in him as a presenter. But these people that you see on these shows, you won't see them anywhere else. The only place you see them is when they're talking about the Gardner, and that's because they're willing to go out there and say things that aren't true, like the way they've cast aspersions on my former next door neighbor, Larry O'Brien, who was the security guard that they tried to, first they put the video out saying they were trying to identify the guy, which I don't believe. I believe what it was, they put it out to discredit Abath. And then when that was done, then they said, that's just Larry O'Brien. Well, it is not Larry O'Brien. And they've told, Kirchian was on the Netflix documentary. He goes, one of the people said, that's just Larry, he forgot his keys or something like that. And it's no big deal. Well, Marge said that she had contacted the FBI. They didn't get back to him. And 2 years later, after that article was published, she told me she still hadn't heard from them.
Okay, time out real quick. I just want to give a little context on what you're talking about. So this video that was released by the Gardner Museum.
No, it's released by the Attorney General, not
by the Attorney General. Okay, so that was released of the night before the robbery.
Right.
And it was a man in the security area caught on camera talking to the security guards. And that man is still unidentified. Is that what we're saying?
Well, what happened was 2 years later, in an article about how they were upping the reward, in like the 20th paragraph down, they said, and by the way, Kristen Satera from the FBI said, we know who that is. We don't need anyone's help anymore. Well, it had been a huge deal. It had been national and it was in the Guardian that they had released this video, and all of a sudden they don't want to talk about it. And then on these shows, they tried to like pin it on Larry O'Brien, who was alive when Fisher started, Robert Fisher started looking at the video again. And then after he died, and he was heroic. He was the first responder. He came down, they said he was there in 10 minutes. Well, he had to do some tough, I know it was Sunday morning, but that's not an easy drive because I live next door to him, to get to the museum in 10 minutes. And then he went in, which was very brave to go in. So, and he was a retired lieutenant colonel in the Army. He was a bronze medal recipient. He's a great guy. And the car came down with the headlights off, down a one-way street in reverse, parked 3 feet from the curb. This is not something that a guy who's a security supervisor who knows he's on camera is going to do. And then Kirchian said that he also owns an Escort, which car enthusiasts have said is the car. Well, it is not an escort that was there. So did he come in a borrowed car? Because it's definitely not an escort. So, they, have these people who've all been involved, like Bob Ward at Boston 25 News and Tom Mashberg, who did a lot of great work last century, and Kelly Horan and Shelley Murphy and Kirchian. These people have all been covering this for 30 years or close to. Murphy has and Ward have. And you don't see them, they're not really terribly interesting or compelling people on any other topic. And they've just kind of gone along with things that just aren't true. I posted something on my site, GardnerHeist.com, about how 14 times in the last 10 years, the Globe has falsely reported that at the press conference, they said the thieves were dead. They did not say the thieves were dead at the press conference. 2 years later, they said the thieves were dead. And so the Globe helpfully backdates the history of it because otherwise the FBI has a lot of explaining to do. And I know they didn't do it. It's not an accident because the wording is always a little different. In 2016, they did an article in January where they got it right and said later they said the thieves were dead. And Kirchian in This Is a Robbery and Murphy in How It Really Happened both said that, you can hear their voices saying that they said the thieves were dead at that press conference, which is completely false. There's nothing in it in Kirchian's book about them being dead. And he goes over and over. I mean, that press conference, like a centerpiece of his book. It starts with it, it ends with it.
All right, so you're saying the Globe has played a little fast and loose with some of these facts.
Yeah.
Can we just go back to the video real quick? Was that person ever identified?
Yeah, well, never identified by the FBI or the museum, but their surrogates in the media have been saying that it's Larry O'Brien, which is completely ridiculous.
Well, you're saying it's not Larry O'Brien,
No.
but this is a person who was in the museum, who was let into the museum after hours by the guards, and the guards have not said who it is?
One of the guards is Joe Mulvey. He died. He's been dead for a long time. And the other guard was Rick Abath. And Rick Abath died, but Rick Abath said in 2015 when they released the video that he didn't remember.
So 2 nights in a row, someone let people into the museum after hours.
Well, yeah, one time they said because they were, one time it was, there's not really explanation. Nobody knows. He does a little pirouette before he goes in. It seems like he's trying to establish that he's not there for any legitimate purpose. I mean, obviously an employee is not going to do that. Someone who's delivering drugs is going to try to be inconspicuous. Someone who was delivering food, who was maybe like a DoorDash guy who's like all jeeped up or something, you could see that he wasn't carrying anything because he spins around. So why was he there? So obviously it's for some nefarious purpose. And his behavior is suspicious. It looks like, people will just have to go and look at it.
What strikes you as suspicious from the body language?
First of all, you have Joe Mulvey standing there and he starts to go out the door and then he doesn't go out the door, right? Then it looks like Abath says to him, oh, there's a car coming or he's coming, because you can see Mulvey kind of rush down the counter. And then they're both there. You can see it's going back and forth outside and inside. They're both there watching the car pull up. Now the car's pulling up in reverse with the lights off. And they're all kind of looking like, oh, yeah, that's cool, And then Abath buzzes him in. The first time you see him coming in is when he's actually being buzzed out, because the other thing is these guys would have to come in. You had to get buzzed out as well as buzzed in. So if they came in and Abath was suspicious and he pushed that button and didn't want to let them out, they were trapped, right? So you see him pushing the buzzer to let him out. So he comes out, he comes into the museum briefly. Well, actually, the first thing you see is the visitor's actually leaving the museum. And before that, you see Mulvey leaving. And Mulvey, the only place you could go was out. There was no place else to go. So he must have been outside. That's what it seems like. And then the guy goes out and leaves the door open while he goes back to his car. And I don't see, and there you can also see pictures of like crime scene photographers using their foot to keep the door open. There's no door jamb to keep the door open. So he just opens the door and somehow magically the door's open. I don't know why. He goes back to his car and comes back, and Abath lets him back in. And that's not normal behavior. You know, there's a lot of suspicious things going on, and they originally wanted people to sort of do this. It looks really bad for Abath. And that was the intent.
And we'll be right back after a quick word from our sponsors. And a thanks to our sponsors. Now back to the program. How long was this individual there for?
3 minutes.
And what were they saying that Larry O'Brien would have been doing? He forgot his keys or something?
Yeah, well, Kelly Horan said, you know, one person said, one guard in a previous article in 2015 said, I remember one time Larry came back to get his keys. That's all. So one time, but she didn't say, oh, he came back to get his keys. But Kelly Horan said that's what happened on how it really happened.
Just my last question on this, I think. What is, again, like I'm trying to wrap my head, and I've seen the video, but I don't know if it like is really that suspicious in my head. If this is somebody that is connected to the museum, because if he's only there for 3 minutes, like what is he doing if it's a plot to rob the museum later on? Like if he's connected to the heist, what's he doing in 3 minutes there?
Well, one thing that he's doing is maybe going over some information, but one thing he's definitely doing is making things look really bad for Rick Abath. And there's other things that are done that are sort of incriminating of Abath, like leaving the frame on the security guard's chair, which people go, oh, that's a diss of the security supervisor. What that meant was when O'Brien came in and he went in the security station, he saw the frame there. So right away, he knows there's a robbery going on, maybe in progress, maybe not. It also means that a first responder didn't take the painting, because a first responder couldn't have gone through the blue room and then gone over and snuck over and put a frame there. So for some reason, I think what they did was they all had stuff on each other so that no one could really rat anybody out.
Okay, so you're saying that by going in and knowing that he's getting himself caught on camera, that was like leverage over Rick Abath.
Right. Now, he could have made some pretext about why he needed to talk to him right away.
Right, sure. Because he doesn't want Rick to know this, that he's going in there so that he can say, listen, if I go down, I have video proof here that you and I spoke. Right.
And they also have video proof of that. They took the video. So whatever happened before, you know, the only way we know this whole story about 1:24 a.m. and there was report of a disturbance, that all comes from Abath. And not only that, that's not what he originally said. Originally, he said that after he allowed the police in, they said they were there about the kids on the street. That's in the Boston police report. And then the FBI gave him a mulligan. Oh, you want to do that one over, Rick? You know, maybe it doesn't sound quite right. Like, why are you coming into my museum? Because there's a problem on the street that's no longer there. So Abath came out of his little, Vermont life, I think he started doing interviews, and he was also saying things that were very incriminating and also were not on board with the narrative. And I think a lot of things that went on were really to contain Rick Abath. And if you wanted me to go on, I could go on about that if you want.
Well, I do want to ask you about what he said that was incriminating, but I also just want to add that, because Abath would have been the only guard both of those nights, right? So Randy was the guard the night of the robbery, and you're saying Joe, I think you said, was the
he called in sick.
Yeah, okay. So, but the guard the night that this mysterious person arrived was not the same. So the only guard that was the same was Abath.
Right.
Okay. So, well, that does incriminate him to me in my mind, and I'm finding it easier to say out loud now that he's deceased.
Right. Well, that was the thing. They released this video. They didn't put out anything. Like there's a Facebook group of Gardner Heist alumni. There's people like Marge Galis have sort of like kept an interest in it. They didn't do any outreach to anyone like, hey, we're releasing this video. We're trying to figure out who this guy is. They just threw it out there to the masses and didn't support it in any way. So that left, and all the newspaper articles I've seen, they all talk about, wow, this looks really bad for Rick Abath. That was the takeaway. And then Abath, after 2015, he stopped talking to the press. And then they completely changed the messaging. Was, in 2016, they re-put up the Shea Tertoni frame. Anthony Amore did an article with the Big Dig. I'm not sure, they had a few different names. And he said, there's nothing that points to Abath being involved, right? I mean, why nothing? And then he went on Berkeley Internet Radio and said the kid made a mistake. And, then this whole apology, even Jeff Kelly too, was talking about how, they would say, like in a 2023 Inside the FBI podcast, it starts, 2 men conned their way into the museum. Now, that's not Jeff Kelly saying that, but then they do this and they go, against protocol. Well, who cares about protocol? Was he in on it or not? And so, and now the Boston Globe reports, Kelly said, Jeff Kelly is convinced that he is. So they don't have a quote of Jeff Kelly. They have other quotes. This is how a lot of these articles are, where you have Jeff Kelly saying, it really makes me sad about the paintings. This is on like the $1 billion art hunt by the BBC. I get sad every time I come in the Dutch room. And then you have Kelly Horan saying, in an interview years ago, very rare interview, Jeff Kelly said that it all started at TRC Automotive. Well, you have him right there. Why are you having Kelly Horan out in a boat in Boston Harbor telling us what Jeff Kelly said? Why not just ask Jeff Kelly? You have him in the Dutch room. And you'll see this in these articles where you have, people who are participating in the show and these media surrogates telling you what they think. Why don't you have them? Why aren't you asking them? So he says convinced now, but it's not a quote. So depending on how much pushback there is, he can adapt. He can say, well, I didn't exactly say convinced. I mean, that's not exactly the right word, but of course, everybody's just letting him go and do whatever he wants, which is so typical. Being retired evidently doesn't change anything. The thing is that you have all these shows and they all predicated on uncorroborated information from Rick Abath. Like I was responding to a disturbance, but you asked me about what he said in the shows that was incriminating. Well, one of the things he said was, yeah, they came in and one of them came up to the desk and then the other one was just kind of like looking around, Well, gee, that doesn't sound like responding to a disturbance, Rick. What's that all about? Responding to a disturbance is, oh, hey, we're here about a disturbance. Can you take us to the courtyard or can you take us here or there?
You were saying that Jeff Kelly, now he was with the FBI for years and was actually running the Gardner investigation as an FBI member.
Right.
Now he is retired.
Well, he was the lead quote unquote investigator. And I say quote unquote
the lead investigator, but
I call it quote unquote because there's eyewitnesses that he hasn't interviewed. So what the hell is he investigating?
Yeah, that's a great question.
If you're investigating, you interview eyewitnesses. Any fourth grader can tell you that. So
well, that's our job here. That's our job. So he's gone. He's done from the FBI, but he believes Abath was involved, or Rick Abath.
That's what the Boston Globe
reported
reported in an article that had copious quotes of him in a picture. So
yeah. Now why? And I see here that he said that Abath gave his 2-week notice around the time of the theft. Kind of incriminating circumstantially, but what else?
The other thing he said was because his footsteps were the only one inside the Dutch room. I'm sorry, the blue room, right? In the security footage. Now, one of the things you always hear is these guys, America's dumbest criminal, they like to make them sound like they're dumb. So they go, they just took the printout. They didn't know that was, anything else. They thought they had, stymied the whole system. Well, number one, why should they care if you know how they went in and out of a gallery? It's not terribly important. They could use the printout to authenticate that they're for real, right? So it does have a function. The other thing is in how it really happened, you can hear Abath's voice saying you can track where somebody is in the galleries by the printout, because like when someone's in the Dutch gallery, every 10 seconds it says, someone's in the Dutch gallery, please, respond immediately, even if it's a guard. So if someone was down there and they didn't know they were there, they could be watching, oh, he's in the Dutch gallery now, or he moved over here based on the printout. And then, okay, so if it was so dumb to take the printout, why did it take you 35 years to figure out that now you had to wait 35 years to tell us that that you think he's guilty based on that printout that they stole? I mean, you knew that the first week, right?
Who's you in this situation?
Jeff Kelly.
Oh,
why did it take Jeff Kelly 35 years to tell us that he thought Abath was in on it because of a printout that they had the first day, right?
Yeah, that is always weird, because they do seem like they always thought he had something to do with it, or gave the thieves permission, or at least let them in. But it does seem like there was, I don't know, an air of politeness or something like that surrounding him, because they couldn't prove that he benefited in any way. And now that he died, it's just easier to say.
Well, here's something that you could do. In, I think it's either 68 and 69, Merlino was arrested. He was a lookout in an armored car heist, right? And a couple of guards were involved. When they did that, when they did the newspaper article for that, they put the names and street addresses of the guards on, at least one guard on the front page of the Boston Globe. They let this guy be anonymous for 23 years. The only reason we even know Rick Abath's name is because he decided he was going to write a book. So, and it's in the Boston Globe. They said a few days afterwards, the FBI, the Boston police, and the museum refused to divulge the names of the guards. So, that's part of the job. Why should these guys get to have their names not divulged? Right? That just, if they're guilty, I mean, you're just making it that much harder. Obviously, it should be. One of the things Rick said in his interview with Kirchian was, I understand how suspicious it all is. Well, yeah, it's suspicious. Why is he treated as though it's not suspicious? And then in the article that Kirchian wrote, he said he hadn't heard from the FBI in 19 years. Like, why, you go look at what they did. They used to re-interview the people for the D.B. Cooper case all the time. Why aren't you going back and talking to these people? So this points to this not being a traditional robbery investigation, that something else is going on here.
What is going on?
Well, I think that what happened was that occasionally you get a situation where you have someone who is not even apprehendable. So I have postulated kind of, privately to you guys before, that I thought that it was Rod Ramsay, right? And so Rod Ramsay, at the time of the Gardner heist, first of all, 2 months later, Rod Ramsay's name is all over the world because he was a spy. He was a convicted spy, and he was also the star witness against Clyde Lee Conrad, who was his supervisor in spydom, also had been his work supervisor. But he was going to testify in absentia. An FBI agent named Joe Navarro testified for him, which is legal under German law. So this guy is being convicted for espionage in German court because they can't get him back to the US, right? So the State Department's involved, intelligence is involved, all these people are involved to get this guy, Clyde Lee Conrad, who was one of the most prolific spies ever, convicted in a German court. And Rod Ramsay is the star witness against him. Plus, Rod Ramsay is the star witness against this guy, two guys that he recruited, possibly other people that they don't know about yet, and himself. So if all of a sudden they arrested Rod Ramsay for doing this, and Robert Ramsay might have had buyer's remorse about having spoken with the FBI about this, about his involvement in espionage, this whole thing could potentially blow up. So I think that this is really what we're talking about here, is a counterintelligence operation, which is being presented to the public as a robbery investigation. And I don't believe that's what it is. And this is why it points to Ramsay being the person who did it, because he's someone that had the background. He had gone into a building to rob a bank with Confederates. He had gone into a building to steal top secret documents and recruited 2 other people. One was in there with him, one was a lookout. So he had experience in recruiting, in bank robbery. One newspaper article said that he had been a security guard and he had broken into a safe, had tried to break into a safe. So now you see like he's got security guard involvement, like he looks at security guards as a potential weak link because he knows from his own experience. He looks like the police sketches. He looks like the guy who's in the video, and which is hard to do, but there is that clear full body back shot of him, and then another full body back shot of him that was in the Tampa Bay Times a couple months later.
And we'll be right back after a quick word from our sponsors. And a thanks to our sponsors. Now back to the program.
Can you tell us a little bit more about this Rod Ramsay guy? So you're saying he was a spy.
He's from the Boston area.
From the Boston area. I see here that he was sentenced to prison for 30 years, but is
well, he may have been sent. Maybe he was sentenced to 30 years. He was out in 14. Except for Pollard, there was a guy Pollard who actually did 30 years. Spies frequently don't get a lot of time because they trade. They trade information. It's more important that you get the information that they have. So he was definitely out by 2004. He was working at a Scrambler restaurant in Florida in 2004, and there was an article in Slate magazine about that. So we know he was out. He did get 30 years. Part of the problem was, he was probably like wanting to make a deal, like I've been giving you this information, but the defense in Germany was trying to say, oh, this guy Ramsay, he's just giving up his boss because he's the real guy and he got some kind of a deal. And they said, no, they could, take an oath and say, no, this guy does not have a deal. Well, that was probably pretty stressful for him. And so he was from Boston. He came back to Boston after he got out of the Army for a couple years. Then he moved to Florida. He has the propensity. He looks like the mugshots. He also looks like, so after I interviewed with Kirkchin in 2014, Abath, I think he probably called Abath and said, have you ever heard of these guys? But I don't know. I know that he contacted Joe Navarro, and I have the emails because he forwarded them to me. But after that, Abath created a SoundCloud page with a picture of somebody that looks like, with gold frame glasses, that looks like Ramsay, somebody that looks like Brian McDevitt, and somebody that looks like the other police sketch. Now, people point out, they go, oh yeah, but the guy has blonde hair. It's like, he's kind of a famous spy that somebody wrote a book about, just about him. I think he knows how to like doctor his appearance a little bit, so I don't think that's necessary. If you really look, he's got like the exact same glasses and his facial features are very similar.
And how did he first come on your radar as far as being connected to the Gardner heist?
I had actually heard about him because of the bank robbery that somebody told me about like years before the Gardner heist. So I had heard that, that he had gone to Northeastern. He had lived at Charles River Park at 2A Whittier Place with a great view of the on-ramp to 93 there, over by Storrow Drive, and that he had robbed this bank. And so that was the extra information that I had. I started feeding, and then I started feeding it into all of this, other stuff and looking, and, it almost seems like if you look at the pictures of him, there's one mugshot of him later where he has kind of a broad, almost a smile. And that looks very much like the unshaven mugshot of whoever it was. And then in the other one, he has kind of his lip in his mugshot for when he was arrested for espionage. His lips are kind of pursed, just like in the mugshot. He must have seen the mugshot. I mean, in some of these pictures, it almost looks like he was trying to look like the mugshot. I'm sure he was aware. And, there were people, Ann Hawley said there were people in penitentiaries trying to call her and threatening the museum and threatening to put bombs in the museum because the FBI wouldn't talk to them. So it could be that, he was trying to make some kind of a deal and they didn't want to talk to him. And so he was putting some kind of pressure on the museum. Somebody was. It's pretty hard to make a call from a penitentiary and threaten people and not have it be known who you are. So, a lot of the stuff, like this guy, J.P. Kroger, he told me that they had an electronic wand, that they didn't need to open that door because, when they closed the door, it made a connection, and you just held the wand up and you knew the door was secure. And I asked him about being interviewed. He said, yeah, I was interviewed in the museum. He said they herded us in like cattle. Marge Gala said, oh yeah, there was a big focus on drugs and people smoking pot at the security desk. It's like, you're trying to solve the biggest art heist, and you're talking to people about whether they smoke pot. That's just going to make people clam up. There's a lot of kind of intimidation against Marge, which I don't know if she perceived it that way. She seems to be very thinks everything's on the level, which, I would be concerned about some of the things that happened to her, like how she described the questioning that she experienced.
What would it take for you to not have Rod Ramsay as your primary suspect any longer? Like, what would have to be shown to you where you're like, you know what, I might have been going down the wrong path?
I don't know. If somebody said he was in prison, I mean, there is a factor of he was in Florida at the time, and so he had to get back. He had to get back up to Boston. He was living in Boston when he robbed a bank in northern Vermont. So it's not like he was not under arrest or anything. There was nothing in the book about him that there were any kind of travel restrictions on him. The book did say that he had shaken surveillance at one point. The Globe reported that they were looking at a bunch of different people, and one of them came in at Logan Airport and who was under surveillance. That's what it said in one of the articles. Well, that certainly would make Ramsay a good fit. There's just so many things. There's so many different things. I don't see how that could happen unless somebody said he's his alibi. I don't see how it could.
Okay, so interesting. Has Ramsay ever been investigated for the Gardner robbery?
Well, I don't know. Not to my knowledge.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting to bring him up in a case where there are so many names that get floated around and a lot of people have theories, and most of them are like organized crime figures. So I'm interested in this spy angle because I think what you say about the investigation from the FBI's perspective is a little bizarre. Like that whole thing is a little bizarre. So you could probably convince me that the investigation wasn't like a typical investigation from the FBI's perspective. And so I think that's why you're saying that it wasn't traditional, because there was this spy involved and it had some different elements to it. Is that right?
Yeah. So, and the other thing, okay, so here's another thing. So in June, you have Ramsay making headlines, right? He's international news because he's been arrested for being a spy. There's a big article that goes out about this. And one of the things that's in the article is that the last time he met with Clyde Lee Conrad was in Boston in, I think it was 1986. So he met with Clyde Lee Conrad in Boston. And he gave him there's this thing about this cowbell, that Conrad gave him a cowbell, which would be a signal to give somebody. So the article ran in the Boston Globe on page 4, which I don't know if you guys sell ad space or, time for your thing, but bottom of the page 4 is like probably the cheapest ad space there is on a newspaper. You want to be up top. You want to be on the right-hand page on the top to the right. So this article, there's 4 news articles above this article in the Boston Globe about this guy who had an espionage rendezvous in Boston. The thing is, in the article that appeared in the Boston Globe had the part about him meeting the spy in Boston taken out of it. It was not the whole article. So, you would think that if someone had been meeting with a spy in Boston, that you would want that to be news so that, hey, that guy lived next to me. I remember that guy. And I think I remember something else. And I remember he had a storage bin or something somewhere, right? So they said that he had classified documents with him in Florida. Well, if he had classified documents in Florida, he most likely had classified documents with him in Boston. So that part of it was spiked from the article. And who was the Washington bureau chief at the time that this happened? Steve Kurkjian. So, there was, and normally you would think they would even do like an article about Ramsay because of his Boston connections. But there wasn't. And there was also, they never put the police sketches in the Boston Globe until years later. Why wouldn't you put the police sketches in the Globe? When you see Netflix, This Is a Robbery, you see they show the sketches in the paper. It's from Northampton. They had him in Northampton. They had him in the New York Times, which some people in Boston got the New York Times. USA Today was distributed in Boston at that time. So it's not like they were, completely gone, but they were not in the Boston Globe. And then, those descriptions like puffy hair and Boston accent, all that was not in the Boston Globe until an article about how, well, the statute of limitations is almost up. So it seems like there's some kind of a cover-up going on, and keep this in this sort of, local toughs, wise guy mafia thing, which is actually a new invention. They were not talking about local toughs. There was no, David Turner was not questioned in 1990. None of these guys were questioned. They talk about how busy they are and how many leads. While they were getting leads, that guy McShane, who wrote Loot, he said it was obvious that the leads were being finely screened, and he said, I wouldn't blame if someone did have them if they didn't even call. So there's been a lot of skepticism. If you read Ulrich Boser's book, right? One of the scenes is he's over with Robert Whitman at the FBI building in Philadelphia, and he's getting a tour, and he sees all the cubicles and everything. And then Robert Whitman goes into the men's room, and Boser says, I'll wait here. And he says, no, come here. I'm just taking a piss. It's fine. Come on in. And then he says, in the men's room, he says, everything you think you know about this case is bullshit. It's all pure speculation bullshit. You seem like a nice guy. If you want to write a book about, based on speculation, have at it. But, that's all it is. And, there's now, you just like look at this kind of evidence that people aren't offering the kind of evidence that I'm offering. None of the people that they're bringing up have that kind of, that kind of evidence, anything you're concrete. You read Kurkjian's articles in BUR, and it's like, oh yeah, Guarente was friends with Donati. That was one article. And then the other article was, yeah, and Donati was friends with Guarente. So Guarente's guilty because he's friends with Donati. Donati's guilty because he's friends with Guarente. That's all, guilt by association. That's not proof. Who are they both linked to? Kurkjian talks about this gang war. There was a gang war, right? Well, Frank Salemi got shot in front of the IHOP or the Bickfords in Saugus. And when they did the article the next day, the Globe started, authorities worry that this is the eruption of a new gang war. Okay, so it was a new gang. There was no gang war. 8 months before the heist, there was no gang war. Then everything was quiet. Then the most famous event in the history of the mafia and the FBI, they had the Bug Medford house, right? And that was all to make peace. So they're trying to head off any potential gang war. Then they're all arrested because it was recorded. So where is this gang war supposed to start? So then what happened was, a couple of years down the road, there did start to be a gang war. And one of the things that happened was this guy, DeVincent, was getting too friendly with someone from a rival gang. Guarente was a Salemi man. And DeVincent was getting too friendly with one of these other gangs, and they told him, you can't hang around with that guy. And so, according to an informant, Guarente had him killed. DeVincent killed. That's in Kurkjian's book, Master Thieves. Well, Donati was in a rival gang, Ferrara. Those guys, the main person they thought who had killed Guarente was Ferrara. So how does Guarente get to be friends with Donati, who's a Ferrara's driver? So it doesn't make sense, even if that those two. He says in one of the streaming videos, he said it was how it really happened, that Donati gave the paintings to his good friend Bobby Guarente. great friend. They might have known each other when they were kids, but they were on opposite sides. And anyway, there was no gang war. If you can look in news accounts, there wasn't any gang war going on. And Anthony Cardinal, who was the lawyer for Ferrara and Salemi at the same time, in an affidavit said that either that the FBI told Salemi that Ferrara was trying to kill him, or Ferrara, or that they told Ferrara that that one of them was trying to kill the other, so that the FBI was actually stirring up this rivalry, according, and that it was not an organic rivalry that would have happened on its own.
And we'll be right back after a quick word from our sponsors. And a thanks to our sponsors. Now back to the program.
It's just a lot of mythology. There's a lot of stuff pointing to Abath being involved. It's kind of amazing to me. I mean, you have to really study it. You look at the most famous Gardner heist photo, and you look at it and you go, oh, there he is. And you really have to be like on a mission to say, wait a second, he doesn't even have any wrinkles in his clothes. The duct tape. I mean, I'm not Sherlock Holmes. I'm not. I kind of take things at face value. His ankles, he's got duct tape around his ankles. He hasn't stretched out the tape in 8 hours. He hasn't like struggled with the duct tape around his ankles. And there's a knife behind him. There's looks like a Swiss Army knife behind him. What the heck is that? Then in Netflix's in the robbery, they didn't even say he had handcuffs. They said he was bound with duct tape and there was a little pad between his wrists. And we thought that was odd. Yeah, that's pretty damn odd, I would say. So in the next streaming video, which is how it's really happened, you have Shelley Murphy saying, yeah, it was really odd how they had this tape around his face. Yeah, it was really odd because he could see, he could talk, he could hear. It had no function. It was decorative, right? It looked like he did it himself. And they didn't make any mention of the fact that he was handcuffed. So we've gone from shackled in the 90s to handcuffed. And now what they said was he was subdued in the basement. Subdued. I don't know if he was subdued. Doesn't even look like he was handcuffed to anything.
Yeah, we went over this, I think, maybe the first time that you appeared on the podcast, maybe season
or maybe
1 or
second.
season 2. But yeah, I mean, we went over that in depth, and I agree. He doesn't really seem like he couldn't have got out of that. It seems like he very easily could have wiggled out of that. I mean,
or there should be sign of a struggle. Like if you listen to what Marge Galis said, she was roommates with Randy, and she said he was, he had like burns on himself, and like from the tape, he had, trauma. He looked like somebody who'd been taped up all night.
Yeah, and I'll give you this, because it is kind of ridiculous that Rick Abath has already seen the people who have taped him up. So why are they even covering his eyes anyway?
Oh, that's good. Well, maybe, that's true.
And also, it's hot down there. He's got long hair. He's sweating. All of that is just loosening up the tape. At some point, he could just, rub his face on something. He could rub it on the ground and just pull the tape off. I mean, it's not something that we've ever looked at and been like, wow, that's some tough binding right there. I think we've always looked at it as been weird, but
yeah, quite the opposite. Yeah.
Okay, so on that subject, in Master Thieves, Kirkjian writes, that first of all, it's kind of amazing that he went to the Hartford Civic Center to see the dead, which he'd already seen a bunch of times the next day in a borrowed van.
But that's that culture, though.
Yeah, I mean,
right, okay, but I mean, he'd been taped up supposedly all day. So he goes there, and then in the book, in Master Thieves, it says he realized when he got up the next day that this was bigger than he thought, and he rushed home, right? But then in Netflix, This Is a Robbery, you hear his voice saying, yeah, I did some mushrooms the first night and drank a bunch of beers, and then the next night I think I did acid. And he says right there, the recording is supplied by Kirkjian, that he stayed both days. But then the book says that he came back because of some kind of concern, which doesn't exist. So, I mean, there's just a ton of evidence. And then to say, based on the computer readout, which we knew March 19th or 20th, I've decided that, he was involved. How much can they push us? This is, it's 35 years ago. I can understand, but to do this, like, foist this on the community, and then it's become very ritualized, every year, and that also kind of takes away people's feelings of reason. You don't want to be a spoil sport. We're observing the anniversary and everything.
Well, interesting stuff here, Kerry. Thank you so much for chatting with us here and opening our eyes to Rod Ramsay and
just another angle on it. So
I love it. Yeah, no, I think it's great. We've never explored that angle here on Empty Frames, and I think it's valuable to explore all of these potential suspects.
Right. I mean, I really enjoyed the if you just take all of it and you try to piece it together, there's good things in all these episodes. You guys have, the people who aren't sincere kind of avoid your show, I think. You've had a lot of good people on. Miles Connor's co-author, Marge, Galis, Casey Sherman. The straight shooters have been on there, and they provide a lot of insight. So,
yeah, well, we're going to keep going as long as this conversation is relevant, and as long as the mystery is still out there. Hopefully at some point we can actually talk about something being returned or something turning up in regards to the paintings themselves or the artwork themselves. But really appreciate you coming on, and again, like Tim said, opening up our eyes to this. And
okay,
anytime you want to come back on, doors open.
All right, thanks so much. I really enjoyed it. You guys are great.